Hey everybody, this is Paul Franklin, and you're listening to Walking the Floor.
I'm walking the floor over you.
Walking the floor.
I'm walking the floor. Walking the floor over you.
Hola, senors and senoritas. This is Chris Shiflett, and once again, you are listening to America's favorite podcast, Walking the Floor. How are you out there in podcast land? I am a sick man, ladies and gentlemen, a sick, sick man. I have an incurable case of World Cup fever. Come on. As you all probably know, America didn't qualify for World Cup, so normally my go-to is Germany, but I drew Spain in our World Cup betting pool out here on tour, so Viva España. Come on, boys. Anyhow, I wanted to give you all a quick update. If you follow my Twitter, you would probably be aware that when we were in Gothenburg on tour a couple of weeks ago, I sent my laundry out to get done. The laundromat accidentally gave all my clothes to some guy named Ted, or we thought his name was Ted, a guy from Australia. Turns out his name's Adam. Adam from Australia, who I think is some sort of like, he's a boxer or something, went back to Australia with all my laundry the next day, didn't have his SIM card in his phone because he was traveling, stuck it back in, and was probably bombarded by like a million text messages and phone messages from the promoter, the laundromat, like our production people, blah, 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 blah. And anyway, I'm happy to say he got back in touch with us and he's sending my laundry home. Yes! And once I kind of inspected what was left of my clothes, I realized that I hadn't actually lost my Willie Nelson shirt or my Tom Curran socks, but there's probably some good stuff in there that I don't even know, went missing. And I'm going to be happy to get it back, so thank you, Adam, the drunk Australian from Australia, who's going to send my stuff home. I appreciate it. Oh, by the way, also, a couple days after that, Air France lost the rest of my luggage. So it was a little touch and go on tour there for a couple days. I had some bad clothing luck. Did y'all see the Guns N' Roses special guest appearance with the Foo Fighters over there in Florence? I gotta say, one of the great musical moments of my whole life. That was like my teenage dreams come true. And I know there's that internet rumor out there that never goes away that I auditioned for Guns N' Roses, which never happened, isn't true at all, no truth to it, but I did get lots of comments on my social media like, hey, you finally joined Guns N' Roses. And then at the end of it, I was so stoked at the end of it, I just went to go hug Slash, and I knocked his hat right off. So sorry about that, buddy. Sorry I knocked your hat off. That was silly and unintentional. All right, let's sell some gear. Let's talk about Zounds.com. You love Zounds.com. It's your one-stop shopping for all your musical gear needs. And, they have free shipping on every single order. No exceptions, no exclusions. Most orders arrive within 2 days, and you can go over to the Zounds.com blog and get caught up on all the previous episodes of Walking the Floor. Also, support for Walking the Floor comes from D'Addario. D'Addario, a fine maker of USA-made instrument strings and musical accessories, is committed to sustainability through the Playback program, recycling over 1 million used instrument strings. For more information on the Playback program and how to help in its mission of reaching 2.5 million strings in 2018, please visit D'Addario.com/playback. All right, let's get to this week's interview.
Together again. My tears have stopped falling.
I love the pedal steel guitar. To me, it's like the magic sauce in country music. It's the frosting on top of the song cake. And Paul Franklin is one of the absolute masters of the pedal steel, an instrument that is so complex, it's been known to drive men insane. We actually addressed that issue right off the top in this interview. Paul Franklin carries on the tradition of guys like Buddy Emmons and Lloyd Green while always moving the instrument forward. As a matter of fact, he's recently started his own online steel course for all you young bucks out there who want to learn the trade. Just be careful. I'll put that link up on walkingthefloor.com so you can check it out. If you aren't familiar with his name, you have undoubtedly heard his steel on countless records. In fact, when I asked him to name some of the artists he's played with over the years, he said it'd be easier to name the ones he hasn't played with instead. From his humble beginnings in Detroit, learning Hawaiian lap steel and sitting in with grown men around town in the honky-tonks, to becoming one of Nashville's top session players, to recording with Megadeth, to touring the world with the likes of Vince Gill and many others, this is Paul Franklin on Walking the Floor.
We're together again.
So steel players are renowned for all being totally insane.
Well,
What is it about this instrument that drives people crazy?
well, it's like probably it's extremely logical. It makes no sense. You know, when you start tearing it apart, you go, oh, well, I didn't see it, but you can't. There's so much that, like on a guitar, you sit down and you can kind of make a chord and strum strings,
Right?
And you get music, and the instrument's tuned, the steel's tuned triadic. So, but it's got these odd notes, like there's a flat 7 and a major 7. So there's 3 half tones apart. So when you hit it with all the strings, you say, well, I can't even strum a chord. It doesn't sound right.
Right, yeah. How did that develop? Like, where did that come from? Because that seems like was that in those sorts of tunings in place before the pedals were added?
No. It evolved. There's several people involved, but mostly Buddy Emmons. Buddy added the 2 outside, like for you guitar players out there, the first note's F sharp, then it's like a D sharp or E flat, then it goes to a G sharp. So it's like instead of you would think it would just go diatonic, like from the highest to the lowest, but it doesn't, which is odd for any instrument. And so then it goes to a G sharp, then E, B, G sharp, F sharp, E, D, and B. Okay.
Did he just keep adding strings as he was trying to figure out new chord shapes and stuff?
Yeah,
Is that
exactly. The first pedal steels were probably 8 strings, well, the first ones actually went way back to the 30s.
Oh, really?
And yeah, the first pedal steels were...
Because they weren't really used in country music till what, like the mid-50s or something?
Yeah, the 50s is when the bending sound of the pedals,
right.
which is that was the lightning rod.
Right,
but up until then, what happened was guys were there was an Oahu method. And like Buddy Emmons and Lloyd Green will tell you that they were at their house and a door-to-door salesman knocks on the door and says, does anybody here want to learn Hawaiian steel guitar? I mean, they had this massive, and it was like a mail-order college. So they taught, that school taught everybody from when you look at the older the people that inspired me, they taught them the lap steel tuning. So
who were the guys that inspired you?
Well, Buddy Emmons and Jimmy Day, Lloyd Green, Weldon Marek, Rusty Young, anybody that could hear during the time. Now, Rusty and I are probably not that far apart in age, but I heard of, it was cool because he was playing on Poco's records back in the 60s, and there were all these, Dylan was experimenting with the steel and all that. So sure. I had a lot of those. I'm from Detroit, so I had a lot of those influences. But Buddy Emmons essentially took there was an E tuning, like, straight E triadic. He said, oh, well, this would be great if it had put F sharps in there, give it an open without pedals. The pedals go from 1 to a 4, the very first steel. And then he started adding because he's very musical. So he said, oh, we need a 6 and we need a 9, we need a 7, and we need both a dominant 7th and a major 7. And he kind of added all the extra notes. And
that's a fascinating time, like in music history, because it seems like all the guys that were around back then, regardless of your instrument, were tinkerers, guys that were not only players but could build and revolutionize the gear.
Yeah, well, like going back to Les Paul,
sure,
and he had a strong influence into this whole town, as he did all the towns. But Les Paul had a country connection, and through Chet and Les Paul were great friends. And then there was Billy Bird, who played with Ernest Tubb, and then he came up with he helped Gibson come up with the Birdland guitar.
Oh, that's where that comes from.
Yeah, that's where that comes from. It's Jimmy, actually after Billy Bird. And if you listen to, since you're walking the floor, Ernest Tubb, he'll say, "Oh, Billy Bird now."
Right, right.
And that's where they came
I
from.
didn't know that's where that came from.
Billy
Straight
Bird was-
from him, that's a straight line to Ted Nugent.
Yeah, there you go. But anyway, long story short, I won't wear everybody out on all this tedious stuff, but pedals came in to be when the Wahoo method, they were teaching all these tunings. Like, hey, if you want a 13, there was an E13th, there was this tuning. So because you had to really, it's like a dobro. If you just tuned it to a straight triad, then you couldn't make a lot of chords. So they would work up tunings to play specific songs. I want to play diminished chords, so I needed this tuning. And so the steels got wider and wider. They went from 1 to 2 to 3 necks to 4 necks. Now you're looking like Frankenstein trying to play this thing.
They were 4 necks.
Oh, there were
back
5
then.
necks. They went up to 5 necks.
That's great.
And then
How was that to tune for a gig, man?
I have no idea. That's thank God I didn't go through that school. But
Yeah. Were all those guys were they all like a bunch of guitar players before they picked up that Oahu method? Was that how it kind of
I
started?
think Lloyd Green was not, and I'm not sure if Buddy played a little guitar or what before that, but it was just you got to remember America was infatuated with Hawaiian. Mm-hmm. We were getting ready to have another state.
Yeah.
There, people were having luau's and all this stuff. So,
right.
and we had Coconut Grove and Harbor Lights were
Tiki
hits.
culture, man.
All
Yeah,
that stuff on the
yeah.
radio. So it wasn't that far fetched. That hey, learn to play the Hawaiian guitar.
So exotic.
Yeah, and they look cool. You've seen the magazines where
Oh,
they
sure,
put together.
yeah.
There's probably 50 different brands.
Yeah, yeah.
And they all look like really great art. just to look at it with it.
I love those old guitars with like the palm trees and stuff painted on.
yeah.
They're great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what brought your family to Detroit?
Well,
Because where were your folks from?
they're from 90 miles from Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, in that area.
Okay.
Which is about 90 miles south of here.
Did they move up there for the auto industry jobs? Was
Yeah,
it one of those things?
they moved because of the Depression. There was an iron mill thing going on in that area, and it was pretty prosperous. But then when the Depression hit, and the war and all that stuff, it just disintegrated any hopes of income there. So they all, my dad's family all moved to Detroit and Chicago. So that's how I ended up there, and I thank God we did, because I also got in my background, growing up as a kid, hearing all the soul. They called it soul, not R&B back then.
Right.
And all that was birthed. Even though I wasn't playing, it was like really evolving. And then once I started at 8, I had that along with Buck Owens and Hank Sr. and all that stuff in my household.
And your dad built your first pedal steels, right?
Yeah, well, he built I actually ordered a Fender 400. My Hawaiian teacher, she said, "Oh, I don't play pedals." She said, "I'm going to teach this kid how to teach himself." Because she was a master. I now know how good she was. She was
Right.
like, I was like having Jerry Bird teach me, who was everybody arguably will say he's the greatest lap steel player of all time.
Right.
And with his skill set. So anyway, she taught me how to play, but then my dad would take me over to see Ernest Tubb or whoever and try to meet the steel player. And back in those days, you you could get to the artist, and
Right.
so backstage
Yeah.
I'd set up this Fender 400, and before I'd even play, they say, "You got to get this kid off this guitar," because they were obsolete back then. Because you can't on a cable pulled guitar on the Fenders,
Yeah.
you can't pull sharpen a note and lower the same note, a string, sharpen a
Okay.
string or
Okay.
lower a string. So therefore, it's limited, very limited, what the guitar do. And Nashville players are already lowering and raising the same strings.
So pedal steel technology by that time was accelerating fast.
it was
changing rapidly, I'm guessing.
almost faster than the players,
Right.
Because
was your dad a pedal steel player? 'Cause
no.
How did he wind up being the one building your gear?
well, he was the out of necessity when that happened. He didn't.
Was he a
know.
musician at all?
No, he didn't know, but all he knew was all these great artist steel players were saying, "Get this kid off this guitar."
Right,
And he
right.
thought, and my Hawaiian teacher was telling him, man, this kid is really accelerating. He's learning,
Right.
like. And
Why
so
do
my
you think
dad,
you were so focused? And I say this, I'm just kind of self-referencing my own, struggles to get my kids to practice their guitar lessons and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was a terrible student myself when it came to practicing. Why do you think at such a young age you were so focused on your instrument? And such an odd musical choice for a kid.
Well, it's weird. It's because my dad was a baby of 14 kids. And so all of my cousins played all the cool instruments, drums. And I think I was just a rebellious...
The steel was the last one left.
It was exactly that. I didn't love it, but I knew my dad used to, point out he loved the sound of steel, like when Slowly came out and all those things. Listen to that steel guitar.
Yeah.
And so when my cousins were all playing all these instruments, and I was just 8. My dad said, "Hey, you want to play?" And it's like I wanted outside the backyard to play ball,
Right.
Yeah. And so I wasn't really focused, but I took to it. It was easy. I don't know what it was about that instrument.
Just made sense.
It just made sense to me, and I no rhyme or reason. And so anyway, my dad, fast forward that, once he found out that got to get this kid off the guitar. Back in those days, Showbud and Emmons and all the great manufacturers of the time sent out brochures showing why their guitar was better than the next one, because ours works this way. And so he had all these books, and he just looked at...
They're giving away their secrets.
Yeah, exactly. No trade secrets.
Right.
And he built one. My uncle had a body shop, so he had all the tools that he needed.
Yeah.
And first one was so-so. The second one was really innovative.
Have you held on to those over the years?
I got the second one. And I played the second one on a Martina McBride record, Timeless. She went back to cut. She cut Ernest Tubbs' song, I got to think, Thanks a Lot. And I used that guitar on that one. She said, I want an old steel. I said, I've got one.
I got just the thing.
I got the one for that.
Have you managed to hold on to your gear from over the years? Like, because you would have started, I mean, I know you were a kid, but you were active as a kid. So did you have some cool stuff through that period in the 60s? Have you held on to any of that stuff?
I had all kinds of cool stuff, but what I tell everybody these days...
Get rid of all that old stuff. I got all this cool new digital stuff.
Yeah, I got rid of everything, and that's horrible. And so now I tell all my students, if it's not eating, don't sell it.
Right. Well, now you have the opportunity. You can buy it back at 100 times the price.
Oh
that
yeah,
you paid for
it. I wish that was the case. But I have I bought back. I want. I'm still looking for an MSA like the one I had when I first moved to town. But I've got a Showbud. Vince found a Showbud that my father had built.
Right.
And so and when we did the Bakersfield record, then he surprised me with that. He said,
wow,
and it was
nice.
great. It was the first year that my dad worked at Showbud, and
wow.
And so I've got that, and I just recently bought an Emmons push pull bolt on, they call them, and so I've got one of those. That's the kind of guitar that I had when I played with an Emmons, and so. Now I've got at least I can look at my thing and go, yeah, I want to see the stair steps, how I got to where I am.
I don't associate Detroit with country music much.
Yeah.
Was there a country music? Was there like a honky-tonk scene there back when you were a kid growing up?
Yeah.
I mean, it would make sense, I guess, because people moved there, from all over. And
well, it's on a grid, and you've got all the people from the South moved there, and like the area where I lived in Westland, Wayne, Taylor, that was mostly people from Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, all Southern people. So my neighborhood, and I look back at it, it's like I was with a bunch of hillbillies in the middle of Detroit, and because of that, there was everything. I mean, the city was really thriving on music, and there were bars, and there was no karaoke scene. Back when musicians could really cut your teeth, learn how to play with a band. See, I worry about that the fact that all that's gone away.
Sure.
But there was a place to play, and
I mean, I think about it, even in my teenage years as a developing musician, it was easy we played gigs every weekend. Keg parties, whatever, bars. It was available.
And that's how, to me, that's how you learn. Is like you've got an idea. I'm going to play Friday night, man. I'm going to check it out. You might play it in all the wrong songs for that to work, but it's like I've got it down.
Eventually, you stumble on the right one.
Yeah, and you find it's all that stuff and the exploration that. But yeah, there was a ton of music, and then my father joined me into the union. I started at 8, and then someone told him if you get there was a local. You asked to answer your question. There was a local scene. There was a guy named Casey Clark who had a local television morning show, and from that the Osborne brothers came. He had a Western swing, like with fiddles and all that.
Wow.
Buddy Emmons got picked up with Jimmy Dickens picked Buddy up. Buddy came from I can't forget what the city is in Indiana, near Chicago. He came from there to work with Casey's band, and then Jimmy heard him.
Oh, wow.
And moved him to Nashville. But there was a scene. There were a lot of country musicians, even though that was not the focus of the town. And then there was all this great stuff, all these R&B players.
Sure. When did you start playing out? Like when did you start playing in those bars?
10.
Really?
Well, you could go to a club. Well, you could go to a club on the weekend, on Sundays. They called them family days. You've been to, you know how France is?
Sure.
And you go and you go to Australia, and you know, at least when I went over there, it's like on Sundays, man, you're seeing all these kids run around, and the men are chugging them back. You know, it's like we're having a great time.
I mean, it's funny for country music. Obviously, has especially at that time had a really like wholesome image, but we all know the reality behind that image. I mean, you must have been exposed to some pretty rowdy behavior.
Oh yeah.
Young
I
age.
remember being shuffled outside because they saw a fight was going to happen, and I never knew the fight.
Get that
happened.
kid out of here!
Yeah, it's like somebody come here, come with me. And then I went back with them and my dad, and you know, but I started playing. I backed Johnny Paycheck at 11. I got embraced by all the old guard because they saw that, you know, here's this cute kid, but I could play what was on the radio by 11. And so I was playing all this stuff. And then back in those days, artists like Johnny Paycheck, Gene Shepard, Billy Walker, they didn't have their own bands.
Right.
So they'd come in that area and they'd have what they called pickup bands, which is whoever the hot country band was, they'd hire them to go for their dates, whatever it was.
Would they send you like a set list in advance? How would that work? Or did you just have a songbook of like a ton of songs that you just knew?
No, they just we knew that. I was that's how I learned to play, was playing along with the radio. So I pretty much knew every steel part on every record, you know, close. Sometimes I couldn't figure it out, but I had good enough, you know.
When a guy like Johnny Paycheck would come through town and use a pickup band, though, would he do like his, I mean, I imagine that would have been pretty early in his career.
Yeah.
Would he do his 3 singles and then like another 10 standards?
Yeah, standards.
Right.
You know, and you typically they would come in and get in the back room huddle and like, hey, y'all know this, you know, and it's like we'd go from there, and then the show was put together. But you know, that's what country music. It was just, you know, a club band with a bigger name, you know, fronting it essentially.
So when did you decide to move to Nashville then?
Well, Barbara Mandrell's father came through, and I started coming to Nashville. They had a thing called the DJ convention, which was prior to the NAMM convention that musicians go, and they were just jam sessions. It was the perfect thing for a musician because all the record labels. It was all coordinated with the birthday of the Grand Ole Opry. The weekend was whatever that particular year was, 50th anniversary, and during 3 days prior to that, the record. They invited all the disc jockeys from all over the country, and they had open bars. Record labels, come up to K-Art Records and listen to our artists, and it's like, here's a bottle of whiskey. And
right, yeah,
so
get them drunk, and here's some new tunes.
And that's how they were doing it. And so you had there was about 4 hotels, and every floor of the hotel was jam sessions. And you had alcohol, and then you so all Fender, Gibson, and then of course all the instruments made in Nashville, and you know, and all the experimentals, like same thing as a NAMM show, but they were all in these hotels. And I saw Buddy Emmons and Jimmy Bryant jam. Wow. I saw, you know, I mean, this legendary jam sessions, you know, and they play for 3 or 4 hours straight, and at the height of their game too, you know.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, it was a great time, and so I was coming to town
you're just
every
in
year.
There, you're a kid, and you're just soaking it up.
Well, and it's like it's a magnet. It's like I got to do that.
Yeah.
So oddly enough, my dad joined me in the union, and I started getting calls when Lay Lady Lay hit. In Detroit, Motown producers and things started looking for, we got to get a steel player.
Right.
And I was the only
the
guy. I
only
wasn't
guy.
the good. I wasn't the best guy. I was just the only guy in the union. So I got cool sessions by default, and that also inspired the desire. Once I played on a hit record, and like I think it was 16 when it came out. But there's an old bubblegum song by Gallery called "It's So Nice to Be With You," and I got to play the solo on that, and. And I got to play with great musicians. James Jamerson played on this McKinley Jackson record that I did, and he was the musical director for Marvin Gaye.
Sure.
And that was the entire Standing in the Shadows band of Motown.
And you're 16-year-old
Well,
kid
I was
playing
15
with
when
those
I
guys.
cut it.
Right.
And then and with that, and then Dennis Coffey was on that date. He heard me. He said, "Hey, I got this rock band. I want to do this little hit." And the guy sang kind of like Neil Diamond, so it kind of worked. And all he wanted was the melody. Well, that's a piece of cake for me. So
Sure.
I went and played that melody. But then I wanted to do, because I learned with the radio, I wanted to do studio work. That was
Right.
my thing.
Oh, so you were hoping to be a session dude.
Yeah, that's really what I wanted to do.
Right.
I didn't have the confidence to do it, but that was my focus.
Well, so when you moved here, from all the artists that had come through Detroit that you'd played with, and your connections that you must have made, friendships you must have made when you were coming down here as a teenager, were you already pretty well connected?
I was well connected, but didn't use it.
Really?
Pete Drake, I met Pete Drake, who was the guy who played on Lay Lady Lay, played on Harrison's All Things Shall Come to Pass, or whatever the correct title.
Yeah.
He played on that record. He played on all of George Jones. I didn't even call Pete till 2 years after I was in town. And I called, "Hey, Pete, this is Paul." He said, "Why in the hell didn't you call me?" And it was like he chewed me out. My first conversation was like, because I didn't want to. I just wanted to come and see. And I didn't. My heroes were here, so it was
Sure.
like, who was I to think that I could actually
Get
do
in on that work, yeah.
Yeah, I just
mean,
wanted to learn. It was a college for me.
What was Nashville like when you came to town? Did it have like a more sort of small town feel back then?
Much smaller than it is now, but it's see, like last night meeting Dave Cobb. Dave's the type of producer that I remember back then. Who just lets it happen. It's like, okay, I know the energy and very, very excited about it. It seems like there was a lot of that and less about the corporate.
Right.
More about the music
Right.
and less about the corporate thing. And
was it easier to sort of for lack of a better word, network and meet people and meet other artists and stuff, like, because everyone was kind of hanging out at the same bars and
Oh yeah, and it was open. If once you knew somebody, like if they knew you weren't gonna go in and disrupt the session,
Right.
you could walk in off the street and watch a session.
Really?
Yeah, you could go in. You might walk in and start a, and if they sensed you were a good person, and if inside George Jones was cutting, they'd go, yeah, just stand over there, and you just sit there and watch.
I mean, that's amazing.
That- see,
is
that's-
like,
I know.
unheard of nowadays.
Yeah, well, it's not that way now. You can't even get past the receptionist, if you want to go up to see somebody in A&R or whatever. But it was a small town in that sense.
Did you start getting session work right away, or were you playing around town? How'd that go?
No, I didn't. It was a few years after I called Pete Drake. He put my wife. I was starving, and I was down to I was making $80 a week with a kid and a wife, and we were barely hanging on. And he said, "Does she work?" So he put her to work as a booking his sessions, and as receptionist and.
Your wife.
My wife.
Wow.
Yeah, and
So was she throwing you a bone like, he can't do this one here?
No.
Come on, Paul. Get over there.
No, we talked about that. No, he did.
Oh, wow.
He took. You remember a band, Brewer and Shipley? They had One Toke Over the Line, Sweet Jesus.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it was like a southern rock kind of thing. When they
Yeah.
were in town, I get this phone call from. This is the kind of things Pete would do. He'd call me because my dad works on guitar. "Hey, Paul, get over here, man. What are you doing?" My guitar's not working. So I show up, and Norbert Putnam, who's producing this thing, and a great bass player from Muscle Shoals and played on Elvis's record. He's the producer. So I walk in, and Pete's at his guitar. He said, "Sit down and check it out, man. It's just I don't know what's wrong with it. Just play." And so I'm sitting there, I'm playing
So
like this.
he's throwing you a little
Yeah, he
softball to
said-
just get you
well,
playing in front of that producer.
And he goes in the control room, and so they're sitting there, and I guess, and he'd say, "Hey, play that little thing that you did," and like that, and see, because I tried to do that and I couldn't get it to work, so he had me just showing Norbert,
Right.
So I couldn't find. I said, "Man, I can't find anything wrong." I hit the talk back, and I can't find anything wrong with this. And Norbert says, "You ready to do it?" And so, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, Pete got sick. He left."
I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You see, it's funny to hear that story. It's
Yeah.
such a generous thing of Pete Drake to do.
Yeah.
And you would think that it would be the exact opposite. You would think
Yeah.
that those guys wouldn't want some young buck to come in and get the opportunity
Yeah.
to steal their gigs. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, he was very secure, and he did the talking guitar thing and had a hit with Forever, and he produced Ringo Starr's Bukula Blues record, and,
Right.
And he was very secure within what he did. He was
Sure.
unique, and he's the one that taught me. He would give his late night lectures, and he told me, he said, "You're going to do good." He would point his finger in my face. "You're going to do good in this town." He said, "But you better give back." That's what he believed. He believed
Right.
in you had to help, and I wasn't the only one that he helped. It's story after guitar players like Del Sellers and guys who went on to have great studio careers. Johnny Gimbel.
Right.
He went on to help all kinds of musicians and other steel players. Larry Sasser, myself, Jimmy Crawford. He got Ben Keith the job with Neil Young.
I mean, do you think that that's an underlying influence of, say, maybe the motivation for you to start the online school that you're doing?
Exactly that. What happened? Well, two things happened. I was approached several years before that with, this online streaming thing is the way instruments have to be taught in the future.
Right.
And it's just the way it is. You're not going to get a kid to sit down with a book or a DVD or a CD player, and carry that around. But they're going to have their phone in their hand.
I use that stuff. I'm constantly searching YouTube for people
Me
showing
too.
the licks because I'm way more of a visual learner when it comes to music.
Yeah.
Than reading something out of a book. I could never get the feel right out of a book. Whereas
Yeah.
if you just see somebody do it, you just see where their hand is. You go, right, okay.
Oh yeah,
I got
that's
that.
it. And it becomes easier than the book.
Yeah.
When you try to put in words what you're actually doing, it becomes very complex. Whereas
Sure.
you go, we
just
can
doing
all
this.
throw a ball.
Right.
Think about all the actions and throwing a ball,
Yeah,
and your
yeah.
wrist has to bend, and you got, and so it's much easier. But that is the motivation. Two things: Buddy Emmons' death. Buddy became a recluse when his wife died, and I used to call him up trying to get him to sub for me, and hey, why don't you come sub with the Time Jumpers? And he said, well, just keep calling, but but he was not, as it turned out, was not going to do it. But when he passed, I also talked to him about, have you thought about teaching? Maybe that would be a way to get back into
Right.
it. Might motivate you but when he died, it just dawned on me, and I'd been approached by another company, and Brian Sutton's doing this one online, and I thought, well, somebody's got to do this, because see, the way I play, I was taught by an Oahu method person.
Right.
So the importance of the left hand for accuracy and tuning, all the things that people really do love about the instrument.
Sure.
You have to, this is the most important. The left hand, the bar hand is the most important. When pedals came along, all of a sudden you could press a couple pedals and it did what the bar used to do.
Right.
And so guys,
What do you call
once-
that? Slant bars?
yeah, slanting.
Right.
But then so people stop focusing in on the left hand, that's my primary focus, even today, no matter what I play. And it is Lloyd's, it is we only have a few masters left from that generation.
Sure.
J.D. Manis and they're young guys, I say young guys, but in the 50s and 60s that came through that all play great. But I became very concerned. Like, who's going to teach us? I looked at all the stuff that's on the net, and no disrespect to everybody. Everybody's trying to help, but the things that aren't taught are the most important. Like,
Sure.
someone has to say, no matter if it's easy to do with the pedals, you still need this. You're going to need this eventually, because think about Jeff Beck or yourself. I've heard you play when you take and you bend a string, and it's like you decide to use more vibrato, faster vibrato, short, all those
Right.
little nuanced things. The steel is a very emotional instrument, no matter what level you play it at, whether it's the Daniel Lanois stuff or whatever. You still gotta milk it. You
Yeah,
gotta.
it's the pitch. Pitch is like
Yeah.
that is like such a deciding factor. Even guys that don't have tons of licks,
Yeah.
I'd still like to hear if they pitch it right.
Yeah, it's because it's a beautiful sounding instrument, and
Sure.
if you can get it in tune, and so that's what I thought. Somebody's got to do it for my generation, and I, it's my way of giving back because if I can just lay out what I know and all the instruction on my instrument. The other thing that surprised me, and I didn't realize it, because I've been doing, I've cut with Megadeth and I've cut with different, John Mayer and different things through the years, and I've been doing great. So I think the steel guitar is evolving. Then I went back and looked at it. They're still telling people to get a book written in 1970 on pedal steel, which is great for the time.
Sure.
But it's like, what about everything that happened
What
since the
about the
70s?
last 40 years?
Yeah, well, and look at the same would be true in guitar with all the tapping
Sure.
and all the all
Right,
the
yeah,
things
yeah.
that are now part of a modern culture,
Right.
musical culture.
Right.
And so I felt like if I don't do it, who will? And I
Yeah.
talked to Lloyd, and he said he didn't. He's 80 years old. He's not going to do it. And a few of my buddies and nobody. And I thought, I've got to do it. I have no choice.
Well,
know?
it's funny that I was going to ask you this. Do you think that there are enough young up and comers to fill those shoes of guys like Lloyd that are not going to be here? Mm-hmm. I hate to be morbid, but as guys are aging out, are there enough people coming into it? It seems like a very niche thing, and probably always was. I'm guessing,
Yeah.
but do you think with the accessibility of what you're doing online that they'll be like, that will be the catalyst for a new generation of steel players?
Well, you look at most of the steel players that are really good, and they're like 40s up. And there aren't a lot. There are a few guys coming along that are younger. There are a lot of young people playing steel.
Right. Well,
Okay.
it probably takes like 20 years to get any good at it.
But it really doesn't. But it really doesn't. It does if you go with what exists out there,
Right,
because there's
right.
no single thread to go. You go from here to here to here to here. What I lucked in to was getting the teacher I had, Wanda Bruning, who was she told my father, I don't play pedal steel, and we'd already ordered a Fender 400, and she taught Hawaiian. She said, I'll tell you what I'll do. She said, I'll teach him. I did a trial lesson. She said, let me see if he's got talent. So we did that, and then she said, I'm going to teach him. She said, I'm going to teach him how to teach himself. And so she taught me intervals. She taught me all this. Like, I wanted to learn, I remember specifically, like she said, I'm going to teach you a song. And so I said, can I learn this song by Buck Owens? I forget what song it was.
Yeah.
And she said, no, honey, no. She said, I'm going to teach you what you need to learn. Right. And you can teach yourself,
Yeah.
Buck Owens. And she taught me, I learned.
That's like how when I first started taking guitar, I wanted to learn how to play Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne, but luckily my teacher taught me a few scales and some root chords.
Yeah, and
which
gave you
turned out to be better in the long run.
Yeah, it was not what I wanted, but what I needed. And that's what she would say, and that's was her quote. Honey, I'm going to teach you what you need, not what you want.
I got to remember that. That's
Yeah.
good. I'm going to use that on my kids.
Oh, it's great, but and because of that, and that's what I decided. Like, I've just finished. I'm going to be putting out a beginner's course from this course, just an excerpt, so that a guy that's just at that level can just go and dissect it, so he isn't distracted by things that are maybe where he shouldn't look
Right,
at the
right.
moment, and just get this down first. And so and it's basically all of that stuff, and then you go from there. Then you can get in and you can learn whatever you want. Then you can go play a gig.
Right.
And that's essentially, if you've got all that, you don't even have to know a song. Like you asked me when I played my first gig, I didn't know a song. What I did was I knew little things. Like I knew how to go from a C to a F. And I knew how to go from a C to a D minor.
Right.
And I knew this is what she taught me. She said, these songs are broken down like this.
Right.
And so
When
she
you
said,
hear the one go to the flat 7, it's going to the 4 chord,
Yeah.
so you can jump there.
so all of a sudden I could back up, and I just play. And she said, just play simple. She said, just do this, and which was basically padding.
Right,
And so when
right.
I was 11, man, I was sitting there just doing what she told me, and the old men are going, hey, this kid is good, because I wasn't messing things
Right,
up,
yeah.
and I was kind of going along, and then
Yeah.
then I'd learn when it come to one of the things I'd learned on the radio. That's how I got my song base. I had an intro to this song,
Sure.
and then all of a sudden I could play that little intro
Little
when it came to
pickups and
solo
stuff, yeah.
And then they were, everybody just kind of took me under their wing, but also I had a language. I could speak in intervals. I could, she taught me to read, but she said more importantly, you need to know the intervals because
Right.
I told her country players didn't read, and so she said, okay, well then you're gonna do this, and so I could, if I got with a great keyboard player or whatever, and they played a chord I didn't know,
Yeah.
I'd say, what is that? And then they'd give it to me in intervals, and then I go, oh, I got to have a pedal
So I
for
can
that.
throw this one over. Yeah.
Yeah, or I can't get that.
Right.
And then she also told me when you can't get all, because Hawaiian players could not play full voice chords.
Sure.
So she said you just play the strongest notes.
Oh.
And so as a kid, and it's interesting this whole thing, and what I look back at it, and I think, well, that she saved me time. Because you can learn 15 tunes, 15 songs, and if nobody really breaks it down for you,
Right. You don't really know what you're
you
playing.
You don't know
Yeah.
what you're playing. You
Yeah.
got 15 songs.
Yeah.
Now show me another song. You're sitting there with duh. Well, what do I do now? Because you have no mechanism
Yeah.
to move forward.
There you go. You heard it here first, kids. Learn just a little bit of theory. It goes a long way. Let me
Yeah.
tell you.
In the conversation too.
Okay, so how did you wind up getting your first road gig, touring gig, was Barbara Mandrell, right?
Yes.
How'd that come about?
Well, just in playing back in Paycheck, and her father was a Moss Wright guitar rep, and he was coming through the area, and he happened to go to the show where one of these artists was, and I was the steel player backing him, and he, I want your number. I got a girl, that plays steel too,
Right.
and she's going to be big. He was telling my dad, and of course, we didn't think much of that.
Sure.
But when they kept tabs on me, and so when I was 17, I was in my 11th grade, and they said she got signed with Columbia Records, and they said Earlene, their daughter that played drums, is taking correspondence school. Would you consider doing that? And of course, my parents said no, and I thought, oh, I'm gone. I'm gone.
Right.
This
Yeah.
is a job. This is
Yeah.
Nashville. And so I argued and convinced them to let me do the correspondence school. So I left 3 months into my senior year.
So that would have been like her first touring as well.
It was her.
Right?
She just had her
Right.
first single was a country version of Do Right Woman. She named her band, which I hated, Barbara Mandrell and the Do Rights. That sounds like something out of Spinal Tap.
Totally.
It's like,
Well, here's a question for you. I mean, for people listening that aren't familiar with Barbara Mandrell, she was a singer, but she also played the pedal steel herself.
yes.
How come there aren't more women pedal steel players? Like, I honestly can't think of any besides
Yeah.
Barbara Mandrell. I'm sure there must be some out there, but
there are,
right.
but that's the thing. It's like certain instruments appeal to. I think that's a growing thing because there's a girl in London, Sarah Jory, and there was a Porter Wagner had an all-girl band. And so he had a steel player, and there was Donna Hammett who played with Bill Anderson, and there's about maybe a dozen or so girl steel players in Nashville, but I think the whole bulky carrying in, the thing's heavy, and that doesn't. I don't mean that as chauvinistic,
Right.
but when you look at all the amps and all the stuff,
Yeah.
and then you look at a violin,
Right.
and you look at it's just there's things that are just seem more, magnetic to a woman.
Sure.
And that's true with young kids too. They see that they'd rather pick up a guitar, something that's easy to carry, than look at that big contraption.
Yeah. Or now just, play with a computer.
Yeah, that's right. Not learn anything.
Right, exactly.
Air guitar.
yeah, there you go. GarageBand.
Yeah.
For people listening that don't know, can you talk a little bit about like all the artists you've backed up on the road and in the studio? I mean, there's just the list goes on and on and on.
Well, okay. Outside of
Like, who are the primary ones? Who are the ones that you were the most
Prominent?
associated with or
Well,
worked the most with?
I've done almost all of George Strait records, almost
wow.
all of Alan Jackson's, and pretty much all of Shania's records. I got really lucky. I got into camps with producers that were really popular, but it's pretty hard. And I don't mean this egotistically. It's just that I started doing major session work in the '80s with George Strait. Was the first major artist having hits. But I did Rodney Crowell, and I mean I did. It's easier for me to say I didn't record with Buck Owens, right? and I actually got to record with Johnny Cash on a duet. And I recorded on Ray Price's last record, but I pretty much everybody that was on my bucket list in Nashville, from the old and the modern generation. Now there are some new acts that I haven't recorded with,
sure.
but go up to but I do Thomas Rhett, Brett Young,
right?
So
it's
still
and
I just
guys,
did this.
Still
this
working
kid
all the
that's
time out here.
this kid that's the rave Mason Ramsey that just did Ellen.
Oh,
He's got like 2 million followers on Instagram. We just recorded him this week. So
wow.
Yeah, so I feel like. But I toured with the Dire Straits. I did the last Dire Straits tour. I did the Notting Hillbilly tour. Worked with Mel Tillis, Jerry Reed, Dottie West, and then I played, just with jazz people. Earl Klugh, when he came into town during the '80s, it never got released, but we got to do that, and I've always pursued that as well, because it's like I always study what I want to be ready for any call that you might get.
Sure.
And I think that's the new.
It's got to be fun doing things that are a little off the beaten path. Like you mentioned a minute ago that you recorded with Megadeth. I mentioned I was pretty unusual.
Yeah. Do you know Dan Huff? He's
No.
guitar. He was in L.A. For a while, and he played on one of Michael after. Van Halen did Beat It, I believe it was. They wanted guys with that kind of chops,
sure.
and so he was a studio guy. He played for Quincy and Michael on the Bad record. And anyway, he moved to Nashville. He's one of our leading country producers.
Oh, wow.
And so he got the call to do Megadeth because of his connection with Mutt Lange and all that thing, and somehow that got thrown in his lap. And so they're in Dave Mustaine is here in Nashville, and Dan said, it'd be really cool to put a couple Nashville guys on this record. And so anyway, I got called, I only got listed in the special thanks area because you can't be listed as a musician on the But anyway, I put steel guitar, and I did it on an intro.
Oh, okay.
And it's like, everybody thinks it's a guitar.
Sure.
Where I'm running through tons of stuff, and it's just a slide kind of thing, and that's all did it. And Ron Huff put some strings on, and there was keyboards put on that.
Right.
The next album they came to do with Dan, Dave said, you can make it sound a little bit more like a steel. So I got to play through a Leslie, and it's cool. And yeah,
coming soon, Megadeth's tribute to classic honky tonk. That's the next record.
You know what? I mean, he was a good patron of the town. He fell in love with Nashville, and he allowed a little of that culture to sift into their music without destroying what they were about.
Well, how far back do you go with Vince Gill? I mean, I know that you play with him, like you tour with him all the time now, right? But like, have you guys been?
I met Vince when he was in Pure Prairie League. He just left. And he played on Dave Grisman record with our fiddle player from the band, Jim Buchanan. So Jim knew him, and he said, "Hey, why don't you come out to we're playing Knott's Berry Farm." And so Vince came out, and we hit it off. He played me some demos he was doing, and he was kind of wandering. He wasn't sure if he liked Nashville, wasn't sure if he's gonna head that way or whatever. And so anyway, fast forward a few years, he moves to Nashville, and I get this phone call. Hey, buddy, it's Vince. I got some demos. You want to play on them? And I went and played with Tony Brown, his producer. And on those demos was Nobody Answers When I Call Your Name demo. So I played on that, and then I get the call to play on his record. Now, he had done a couple records in Nashville with Barry Beckett, and they'd done a few things that weren't. And this was kind of like going to be his last hurrah.
last chance.
Well, you
Right.
don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like,
sure.
once you have two or
Yeah.
three things that don't do it,
Yeah.
nobody knows. But you sense that. And so he was going to do what he wanted to do.
Right.
I'm going to do my own songs. Everybody's trying to steer him away from doing his own songs.
Sure.
And the fans dictate the final hurrah because they like the way he wrote, and they
clearly.
took to his songs. Yeah, clearly. And the rest is history. But we met on that record. I was so busy in the studio I couldn't tour. He asked me, would you consider? And I did one show up in Gatlinburg, one off show with Willie Weeks. He just got Willie to go out with him, but I was just too busy. I couldn't do it. I was afraid to leave town.
Right.
I'm afraid of losing my work.
Sure.
And so we've known each other since that time, and then he joined the Time Jumpers. I took his. He had a great steel player. When I didn't do it, he took out John Huey, who had played on all the Conway Twitty records.
Oh, wow.
And which is the style that I had kind of emulated on the solo on I Don't Call Your Name. Nobody answers. But anyway, John passed away. And so he was in this Western swing band called the Time Jumpers.
Sure.
And I never played Western swing music in my life, but I studied jazz, I studied bebop, I've heard Western swing all my life, but nothing much past San Antonio Rose did I
Right,
ever
yeah,
play.
yeah, sure.
It's the one club token song. And so anyway, I joined the band, and then a year later, Vince joined the band. It blew everybody's mind in town. Well, you're a superstar. Why are you joining a local band?
Right, yeah.
And he's been there. I think
Just
he's
loves
7.
to play, right?
He loves to play, and it's like it's like what I believe in. It's like there's all of these elements that cause you to be you and the thing that people know you for.
Right.
But it's all the study and the diversity, grabbing this from here,
Sure.
from over left field and all there. And that's what Vince is doing, and that's what I did. So we joined this band, and not knowing that we would do a record, and
Yeah.
we ended up touring. We did about 30 dates last year, about 40 the year before, and we're all too old, man, to tour. No, I mean, I liked, we were going to tour with Vince, and do his dates. And of course, Vince is out with the Eagles right now. So,
Right. Well, how did the Bakersfield album come about?
Well, it's a weird, we played this old club, historic club for bluegrass, the Station Inn. And everybody,
sure.
for some reason, everybody had left. And it's just Vince and I loading out last. And so we just sat down on the porch together, and he said, "Hey, buddy, you got a second? I'd like to talk to you." And I said, "Yeah." So we sat down, and he said, "Man, I want to do an album." And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to do an instrumental album.
Right.
And we sat down, and I, the way I felt about, I didn't feel like, well, I'm not a singer. I can't really contribute. And he said, "No, I want to do it." And he had this vision of a singer like, Buck Owens had Don Rich, Ernest Tubb had Billy Byrd, it's like
Yeah.
Take It Away Leon and all that. And he's always had a fondness for that connection.
Sure.
And that's what he described. He said, I want to do it with I love the steel. It's his favorite instrument, steel guitar. I want you to be the vocalist with your instrument. And so that was intriguing. And we talked about because he's a monster guitar player.
Oh yeah.
And and he could play. We could make any kind of record we wanted to. You could do a Larry Carlton or a rock record, a blues record, whatever you want. And but he said, "We'll play on it," but I don't want to do instrumentals, and I didn't either.
Right.
I don't really. That's not something I love doing.
Sure.
I just do it when I have to. But so that's how it came to be. And so I said, Vince, I'll just play on your record. I'll do it. We can
Right.
just do it.
I mean, it's awfully generous. I don't want to diminish your role in it at all, but for a guy of his stature,
Extremely.
to put somebody else's name on the record is, that's pretty wild.
Oh,
That's-
it's never.
That's a huge show of respect.
Yeah, well, and
to what you're doing.
I don't know if that's ever been done, but that's the way I viewed it. I thought, this is like,
I mean, was the Bakersfield sound always one of your
Yes.
obsessions in country music?
Yes, it was. And here's the interesting thing. He's from Oklahoma. I'm in Detroit. And we're just a few years apart. He's I'm 4 years older than Vince. And we still, he started playing when he was young. His first, Buck Owens was his first thing, and Merle Haggard.
Right.
And my first pedal steel guitar album my dad bought, once I got the instrument, he bought me You're For Me for Buck Owens.
Oh, really?
So I'm
Is
listening
that Mooney?
That's Mooney, yeah.
Did you ever get to hang with Mooney at all?
Oh,
Did you
yeah,
get to interact with him?
yeah. Oh, yeah. He was a wild one. Mooney was a rock and roller, man. I'm telling you, he could have hung with anybody. But he was great. But anyway, so that's where we both started. And we realized in doing that, and he said, well, man, I've always, and that satisfied so many, when we talked about that, Merle Haggard and Buck Owens, it was like, well, there we are. Let's just do half of one song. That's a catalog. And we both like the early stuff because we thought the bridge into any artist is their beginnings.
Right.
And not that we were doing it for that reason, but we thought, let's bring that stuff forward because everybody's going to remember, the later stuff. But it's like the old stuff tends to get forgotten. So we grabbed the old stuff. And we're getting ready to do another one on focusing in on George Jones, Jimmy Dickens, Ray Price, and Conway Twitty.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're gonna, and the same thing. Go back and grab that stuff, and it is extremely generous.
I want you to know I bought that Star Day book you were talking about yesterday.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh,
was Star Day a Texas label? Well, they were George Jones's label, right?
Well, Star Day actually is in Madison, Tennessee. Don Pierce. It's the collective efforts of three people, and Don Pierce was he had lived in L.A., I believe it was, and running a label, and so he already knew how to make that work. And then they had the Pappy guy that owned all the jukeboxes, and then the other guy was a publisher, I believe, kind of. I forget what his deal was, but he knew how to manipulate the jocks, and they had it. They had a machine, man, and they were just there to catch all those dropped artists like George Jones and Gene Shepard, Porter Wagner, and all them as Nashville really did go pop.
Right.
Yeah,
that's an interesting part of country music history, and you see this not just in country, but in sort of all genres. The role of those old school indie labels at the time that all those guys got their starts on. Yeah,
it's amazing because without them, and I wonder, this is just me pondering, but I wonder if we're not primed for that right now, because when you look at YouTube, you're a YouTube guy, and I'm seeing stuff that I think there's no place for this to live. But
I think that is happening. I mean, I think that's what if you look at like labels like 30 Tigers and stuff that are putting out all this sort of Americana,
I do. I see it happening, and I wonder if that's not the way. I guess my point was if that's not the way it's going to all go back down, shrink back down into.
Right.
And like here's the thing that I loved about Star Day, and the same things was true with Rounder and Sugar Hill and all these eclectic, nuanced labels. Is when you saw the label there, if you didn't know the name of the artist, you go, this is probably really good. Mm-hmm. And so you took a gamble.
Yeah, because you trusted that logo.
Because you knew they represent something, they're looking for the stuff. And I think that could be a future for, I hope it is.
Yeah. So I know you have like a string set through
D'Addario.
Through D'Addario. How'd that come about? What is that? What's specific about that?
Well, what's specific in my quest, for the best sonic value in a track. Sometimes a string, if it's too thin, it can be the G sharp note on a steel guitar is a real high note, and guys were putting 10s and 11s. So when you see sets, you see a 10 and 11 in there. And so I had gone to a 12. And then like for a 14, which is also twangy for the E note, I've got 15s. And so
you like them heavy.
Well, I got them heavy so that so as you go up the neck, if you want to get screaming, it's still got some body.
Right.
And so I was a guy that always had to buy. I bought a set of whatever, and then had to get individual strings to create my own set.
I imagine in Nashville you could probably go to any old guitar store and get specific pedal steel strings, but I imagine that you can't. In most places, that wouldn't be the case. Like I don't recall ever seeing that at my local shop.
No.
Right?
Well, and actually, after Showbud left downtown, you couldn't get into Nashville. There was a few.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
that is surprising.
There was a Steel Guitar World store for a while, and you could buy strings there, but they didn't deal with every string. And see, I like. A lot of times what happens with the boutique strings, they buy them and they sit there for a long time, so you get aged strings, and I want the good stuff.
The good fresh stuff.
And so D'Addario, I had been using their strings a long time on my own, and we were doing an All for the Hall show, and I met their rep, Tom, and he gave me a set, and I said, man, I really love this. Do they do this? And I started talking to him about what I like, and so I endorsed their strings, the NYXLs. I think they're called 1238 pedal steel, PS for pedal steel, and got them to do these. They came out with a great string that lasts, and I like nickels. Most steel guitar string companies are doing stainless steel, and they're too brittle sounding for the instrument's brittle to begin with.
Right.
So you want everything you add to it, you want it to warm it up.
Right.
So it can, and then you can get the twangy edge when you need it, but because that's just EQ. But anyway, they came up with that set, and I was amazed, after I kept on. And what they found is everybody was like, as I would talk about the gauge, everybody's going, hey, I want those gauges. So they started seeing that there's a market for a new gauging system for steels, and so they came up with my gauge, and they're doing really well. A lot of guys have switched to now using a 12, now using a 15 for their E's, and noticing it gives them a little oomph to their playing, especially when you hit the strings hard. And a twangy string, it can also go sharp. That's the other deal.
Yeah.
And so,
I mean, for people listening that aren't familiar with the instrument, I mean, it is a nightmare to tune those things.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't really play. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but I own one and doink around with it. And I'm going to definitely dive into your online stuff when I get a break in August. But just my attempts to even tune that frickin' thing it's not easy.
And it's a constant struggle you have, because essentially what you're doing, for the guitar players out there, they'll get it. What if you were using your whammy bar for everything you played?
Right.
And you're going down a whole octave. Those strings wear out real fast if you do that. They just, the technology. And so that's what we struggle with. And then there are metal parts on. The more metal you put on a guitar, the harder it is to tune.
You heard it here first, kids. Yeah. Paul Franklin says we should all put Floyd Roses on our pedal steels.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's what. But I have a speaker too. Eminence was great. I helped them with trying to go back to what I'm a study of old records. And like Together Again was cut on an old Jensen kind of basement amp, the old speakers, but they couldn't handle the volume. And so what happened through the years is that they got volume, but they didn't maintain the tone of some of those old speakers, like the old JBLs and all that. But you want a little bit of breakup.
Sure.
And so I was thinking, we got to there's got to be a fine line to keep it clean when we want it, but you want a little hair,
right? It's probably breaking up on the amp a little bit, but it's maybe breaking up through the console a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit of everything.
Yeah,
right?
It's a little bit of everything. Maybe hitting the cone, the speaker, the microphone. But it's just, there's a balance of great things. So you want your amp not to be sterile clean, because then it's countering everything. It's just, you find that fine balance. And it took them about a year, but they came up with a speaker, and it's just, everybody's raving. Here's the way I test gear. Okay, because I work on a lot of records and with the best engineers. I never announce I've got anything new, and my cabinets are always looking the same, because they're little Walter cabinets. But I put the new speaker and didn't say a word. And I went over there and I'll never forget, but Justin Niebanks and a couple of the engineers I really trust, each one of them independently, what'd you do with your, Paulie, have you done something different? And I'm going, well, why? No, it's great. I was just trying to, And I said, well, there's a new speaker. And so that's when I know I've got something, you know. And I've had the reverse of that. You know, there's been a lot of things that I thought should sound great.
Right.
And I bring them
And
in
it just doesn't work.
And they'll go, hey, can you bring this back? Go bring your other rig back in.
What was the thing you said last night? I don't think this song calls for that.
Yeah. I don't hear me on this song.
All right, man. Thank you for coming today. I appreciate you coming and doing this on a Saturday when you probably, you've got lawns to mow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was telling Chris last night, I just, my hands, if you guys weed eat a lot, you'll know this. You shouldn't weed eat and play a steel guitar.
Well, seriously, thank you for coming and doing that yesterday, man.
Man.
You jumped in there and
I loved
saved
it.
us,
Yeah.
man. I appreciate it.
But anyway.
All right, that was pedal steel guitar legend Paul Franklin. You know, I forgot to mention in the ramble before the interview that Paul plays all the pedal steel on my new record. And it was kind of a last minute thing because originally it was going to be Robbie Turner who played on my last record, but Robbie unfortunately was having some health issues that week. He's fine now, but he was in rough shape there for couple of days, and so I knew I was planning on interviewing Paul Franklin on like the Saturday, and so I just texted him on Friday and I was like, hey man, are you around tonight? Could you come in and throw down some steel? And he did, and it's killer, and he kind of saved us that week. Very, very cool. I loved, and working with him was just a total treat. He's a real cool guy and a total pro and just a ripper on his instrument. And I'm going to put up some links to some different things we talked about, including the online course that he has started. So go to walkingthefloor.com to check that out and, go sign up and become a pedal steel aficionado yourself. All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back in a couple weeks. I think I'm going to finally post my interview with Michael Monroe, rock and roll legend, lead singer from Hanoi Rocks and all sorts of solo records, and he's still going strong. And he's my buddy, and I interviewed him last summer, and I'm going to finally get that posted, so check it out. That's it for this week. We'll see you soon. Adios, amigos!